who is Sean Willis today in 2025?
Oh, that's a great question to start with there. Sean Willis today is put me on the spot here because I've just been reading a book that's talking about saying who I am even if it's not happened yet. So
interesting.
I am a business owner and I am a husband. I am a man who is now sober. I'm a family man. I'm a man of health.
And you're also a man that helps people to overcome addiction, and that's come through your own experience over the last, let's say, 8 to 10 years or so. Mm-hmm. Before we delve into how all of this, I think, will relate to the person listening today, what does that person need to know about the, let's say, last 10 years of your life without going through all of the details?
Yeah. So a little backstory is that I grew up in Macclesfield, was around alcohol from a very young age. Mum was an alcoholic. I started drinking at about 14, and there was a problem with that straight away. Didn't have, the best upbringing in terms of just everything that was going on. There was financial struggles. Mum was a single parent with 4 boys, and I was not very well behaved. Ended up moving out of my mum's at 15, then become homeless, and fortunately my granddad took me in at 16. I had this weird period from 16 to 18 where I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do, and then found fitness at around 18, then qualified as a personal trainer, fell in love with that side of things, and then joined the military at 20. Was in the RAF regiment, spent 4 years there, did a tour of Afghanistan in 2010, come out, went back into the fitness industry, and then randomly, me and my younger brother, Liam, who I'm very close with, me and him, we randomly started DJing, and we got a lucky break in London at a club called Egg, sort of put everything into it, left the fitness industry behind, went all in with the career in music, and it sort of took off for the past, it was like maybe a span of probably about 8 to 10 years. 4 years we lived in London, and then we moved to Berlin, lived in Berlin for 4 years. But behind the scenes of all this, I was slowly developing a cocaine addiction. I'd always had a really bad relationship with alcohol from 14, 15. I was always a very bad drunk. It was, for me, drinking was, or for people around me anyway, it was almost a lottery of who I was going to become on that night. And then I left the industry when I overdosed. I was after a gig and decided to leave it behind. Sort of spent a year, maybe 2, not really sure what I wanted to do, and then started to document my journey through recovery and change on Instagram, and a lot of people in the music industry that I knew reached out to me asking how I'd done it, because I was known as the party boy in the in the industry that we was in, and then set up the coaching business, which is now Willis Fitness, which started with just music industry, but I realized that the problem and the struggles that people have with drink and drug use and bad habits and lifestyle was much wider than that, and that's sort of taken me to where I am today. So that is a very quick introduction.
Yeah, no,
there.
very, very concise.
Yeah.
Let's just delve back into the peak then of you being a DJ in Berlin. I think it was Ibiza as well.
Mm-hmm.
What was an example of what a typical week looked like for you, and how much was recreational drugs, cocaine and drink involved in a typical week?
Yeah, so at the start of my career, we sort of transitioned from just weekend, it was out of the weekend, few drinks, cocaine, party, after party, recovery on Sunday, Monday back to work, and then repeat the cycle. But once I left my job behind and moved to London for the first time to pursue my career in music, all that structure went out the way.
Yeah.
So at first it was, maybe once, twice a week, especially when we was playing, we were going to a lot of clubs all the time, and that would always be from, let's say, from Friday to Monday. You know, there was sort of no cut-off point in between that. And then as time went on, as we started to gig more, obviously that drug use become more regular, and it started creeping in the week. It would be, we'd do like a pre-party at the Magic Roundabout, it was called, at Old Street. And that would be a midweek, and then there'd be another one in Shoreditch, and then we'd have the gigs at Egg at the weekend, and then we started to travel, and this, you know, once a week or become once a week but for the whole weekend, and then it was once a week for the whole weekend plus creeping in on a Wednesday, but then that Wednesday would roll through till Thursday. And I think over that 4-year period in London, that's how it was. It was 3 or 4 times a week, but not really seeing it as a problem so much then, because we was, you know, submersed in this culture. You know, it was a lifestyle. We were DJing, we were in the party. But when we moved to Berlin, that it's got a little out of hand. I mean, it was already out of hand there anyway, but but how it got out of hand was much more obvious. And the first year in Berlin was almost like a dream. You know, playing at some of the best clubs in the world, and having a residency at Watergate, being around all these people that we looked up to. But slowly the drug use started to take over that, and definitely by the end of the time in Berlin, you know, I was using 4 or 5 times a week, and the 2 or 3 days in between was just sort of recovering and then repeating that cycle.
It's interesting you mentioned the cultural aspect of it as well, where it's like you're so surrounded by this situation, this experience, that it almost just becomes the norm. And I was thinking about this in terms of, you know, the person listening and myself. If you're in your 20s, I'd say it's almost impossible to avoid drink, but also recreational drugs. I think drinking specifically is so ingrained in British culture. People come from all over the world to come to England to come to our pubs, right? It seems to be so ingrained. But at the same time, and I think a lot of people will recognize this as well, if you walk into pretty much any pub in London, and obviously when you go to the toilet, for me, I go into the men's toilet, there is a queue of men waiting to go into the cubicle, and they're not going for a shit, right? There's not 8 blokes needing a shit at 1:45 midnight on a Saturday night. And I thought, I wonder how many people actually do recreational drugs. And I found some research that said in the year up to March 2024, 8.8% of adults aged 16 to 59 in England and Wales reported using drugs in the past year, equating to approximately 2.9 million individuals. And this came from like a UK government website. I don't think that touches the size of how many people would be. I think that's like a weekend in London for a lot of people. Why do you think drinking recreational drugs is so ingrained in our culture?
I don't really know why it's ingrained in the culture, but I can see why drug use is now becoming more and more, because I think just because, like, for example, for me, my drug use was always facilitated with alcohol. So, you know, once I'd had that first drink, especially when I first started, it was like one drink with the lads, and then you'd get a bag in, and then that sort of accelerated that. But why it's ingrained, I don't really know. I think it's just come from years and years. Like my granddad, he would drink all the time. You know, he'd have, like, not heavily, but he'd have like one drink every night, or 2 beers, or a glass of whiskey. So I think that's rolled through. But now it's got more and more extreme, because cocaine, especially, and drug use is just so, it's almost just accepted. Like you say, just men hanging around in the toilet. That's just the norm in any pub, any club in London. You know, you don't even batter an eyelid at it. You just think, oh, you know, we know what we're doing. Yeah. But that's accepted.
Accepted socially between people. I considered from a legal / law enforcement perspective, and I actually tried to reach out to a police officer friend, although he didn't reply but to my voice note in time. But I said, like, where does law enforcement sit on this? Because you can look at any festival, any rave, any pub in the UK, and particularly for, say, festivals and raves, 95% of people there are on recreational drugs that are all illegal, and yet there's almost a very overt blind eye being turned to this entire epidemic of drug use. And if it's not enforced, then it becomes okay and easy to do. You've got instant access to any dealer that can deliver any kind of drug within quicker than Deliveroo and Uber Eats can, right?
Yeah.
There's an incredible service from what I've heard. And that, I think, has contributed towards it. I don't necessarily have an opinion on whether it's kind of good or bad from that perspective, because I think it's so part of our social norm now. But a lot of people do it, and it's easy to do, right?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because when I used to use drugs a lot, I used to say there's nothing wrong with them. You know, especially when I first started taking them, there's nothing wrong with a bit of gear at the weekend. You know, it's not doing any harm. I don't know why they're not legal, but the problem is that's how it starts at the end of the day. And for me in my life, nothing good has ever come from me using cocaine, ever. You know, I could have achieved everything and more without that drug. And, you know, I only started to realize that when, for me, it was, you know, almost got to the point where it was too late. And I speak to so many men now, and women as well, who are struggling with the cycle that started with, at the weekend, just going out because it's acceptable to have a couple of drinks and a couple of lines, and that's it. But then they find themselves in a circle, you know, in a cycle of that continuous drug use that just gets more and more and more. And you know, if you've been doing a certain thing for 10, 15 years, it gets harder and harder to break that cycle as time goes on.
I think there's a couple of scenarios that I can certainly see, which is from what I've heard, the pre-decision night out, or pre-night out decision, whereby, let's say you've got a twice a year event at a festival and you're like, do you know what? I'm going to choose to do recreational drugs at this event, and it happens once or twice a year, for example. I think people make that decision because they want to fit in with everyone else. You want to have the same energy as other people. You don't want to isolate yourselves, and it's fun, right? If you're at a day festival and you're drinking and maybe doing recreational drugs, like, you are having a good time in the moment. I think there's another scenario whereby there's the in the moment decision. So regardless of whether you said tonight I am or I am not going to do recreational drugs, you go out, you have a few pints with your mates, you get to the third or fourth pint and you go, who's getting a bag in?
Yeah.
That, I think, is probably the most difficult one, particularly when you've planned not to do it and you end up doing it and there's this level of guilt or whatever. I think people often do it then because they're not feeling confident on a night out, and they need it as social lubricant, or maybe they're getting tired, or maybe others around them are doing it and they want to fit in, for example.
Yeah.
And that's just so ingrained. I think that situation must happen millions of times every weekend in London and every other city across the UK.
Absolutely. I think, you know, if you're going to use it every now and again, no harm in that. But the question I always ask myself now is that why? Like, what if you need to go, if you need to go somewhere and have to take drugs to have fun? Like, are you actually having fun at that event, or is it just the drugs? Because for me, I realized once I stopped using drugs and drinking, I didn't actually enjoy the music industry that much. I didn't enjoy the music that was playing to the extent that I thought I did once I stopped taking drugs. You know, and I think that the problem is because it is the thing to do, that people don't even try and do anything without drink. You know, they wouldn't even try and do a festival without drinking drugs because they're so under the illusion that they need them to have fun at these events. And the other thing that you said about saying that they're not going to, and then ending up 100%, you know, must happen to hundreds of thousands of people all the time. I speak to people all the time that it does. I think the two things about that is, firstly, control. You're not in control of the decisions. And I think secondly is there's too much focus on the sort of stopping doing it, and not any focus on what the outcome is of them stopping, if that makes sense. So if I'm saying to myself that I don't want to do cocaine anymore, which I did for years, that was the only focus. It wasn't, well, why do I want to stop doing cocaine? Like, what are the benefits that I'm going to get from stopping doing cocaine? Like, what is the negatives of me doing? Like, and focusing on that and setting goals beyond stopping cocaine and what I can achieve when I do, but only because I have stopped cocaine. And another thing as well is for a lot of people who are going into situations where they don't want to use cocaine and drink, but do, is because firstly, they're not in control, but secondly, they're not confident enough in that decision. You know, if you go out with a group of mates and you're deciding to not drink that night, but don't tell anyone, and then end up in the pub with them all, and it's like, what are you drinking? It's like, oh, I'm not drinking tonight. And then the peer pressure comes on. You know, 9 times out of 10, you're going to fail. If you go out, tell everyone beforehand, I'm not drinking, but have a reason why. Why am I not drinking? You know, because I want to achieve this, because I want to do this, because, you know, no friend is going to question you. And then when you go out, you've already established that as well. And I feel as well, not saying it with enough confidence. For me now, if someone asks me for a drink, I would just say a Diet Coke, but I'll say it so confidently that people won't even question that anymore. You know, it's not, oh, why are you not drinking sort of thing. It's a Diet Coke, that's it, end of. You know, that's my drink that I'm having. So I feel that there's a couple of takeaways from that for sure for anyone listening, especially with the people that keep slipping up in that cycle of not wanting to drink and then end up drinking.
For the person listening now, maybe that thinks that may or may not use, say, recreational drugs or drink alcohol from time to time, is thinking, well, I don't do it that often. I don't think I have a problem. In fact, I know I don't have a problem per se. I keep myself genuinely fit and healthy, and I feel like I have control over it. Does a world exist where you can do both of those things and still maintain a healthy lifestyle?
I mean, I suppose it can, yeah. But my question to everyone is that, why even bother at the end of the day? Like, if you're only going out every now and again and drinking and using drugs, like, why even bother like using them at all at the end of the day? But then if you do want to, that's absolutely fine. I think, for example, me and my brother, we went through this journey together. You know, very similar problems, but two different people when it comes to drink and drug use. My brother can, even though it was a problem because he would go out and he wouldn't stop, there'd be no drama. Whereas for me, when I go out, there's always something would happen. You know, there's drama, there's upset, there's chaos. So for me, I just can't drink anymore because I know if I have one drink, even if on that one night everything went okay, eventually it will always catch up to me. And then I get back into that cycle. As my brother, he can dip in and out, but what he's finding is the longer he leaves it without drinking, drug use, he finds that every time he does, that's the one time that's just holding him back from everything. It's the day after, it's the only day of the year when he's probably depressed, when he's not getting anything done, when he's wasted money, when he's wasted time. And that's obviously giving the ability to reflect and realise that maybe it's just not worth doing.
I think as well, there's the thinking about like the negative effects. Have you heard of the beta region theory or paradox, which I usually talk about on this podcast in relation to like your career, whereby you're in a career you don't necessarily love, you're not getting all your fulfillment out of it, but it's not severe enough for you to ever make a change. And actually sometimes having a really shit job makes you want to change. I can see some parallels here. If you don't think that there's necessarily too much of a problem, then there's not a severe enough amount of something of motivation or reason to then change. And I feel like that will probably resonate with the person listening now. It's like, well, I haven't hit the threshold maybe, but it's such a problem that I have to stop. But at the same time, the negatives being, is the come down and hangover the day after worth it? Or is the financial strain that it's potentially putting on you, albeit it may not be huge, but it's definitely there. And then the few days afterwards, even like 3 days after the come down and hangover, you're still not feeling yourself. You feel a bit depressed, a bit anxious. You're not quite able to show up at work. And then if you do that every other week or once a month, actually, what are the long-term impacts on your productivity, your health, your motivation, your relationships? I think sometimes zooming out on these things and going, actually, while it doesn't seem that severe in isolation, actually the compound negative effects may actually be a lot more worse than people think.
Absolutely, it's a great point, and I think that this is the problem with using words like sobriety, addiction, problems. It's if I said to you I'm sober, immediately you think he must have a drink and drug problem, and I think that's what also puts people off from going sober, even if they don't have a drink or drug problem, because they assume that I need to. If I go sober, the only reason why I do that is if I had a drink and drug problem. And then they sort of overlook exactly what you just said there, where it's maybe just not bad enough. It's not like me. It was like I'm like a home wrecker, basically. So it was clear that I needed to stop way before I did. But for some people, it isn't. But it is more than likely the one thing that's holding them back from really getting to where they want to be in their life, or maybe achieving more than they thought was possible. Because just going out, even if you're going out once a month, that means once a month you're probably losing 4 or 5 days of 100%. 4 or 5 days over the space of, a year, that's quite a lot. It's maybe, 50 days there. Think of what you could achieve with 50 days if you put your mind to something.
That was part of the reason that I don't drink that often anymore, and I'll often go 2-3 months at a time without touching any alcohol, and then I may go, look, there's a Halloween event coming up, or event. I'm like, I'm choosing to drink tonight, and I drink, get it out of my system, and then the next day I'm like, well, don't want to do that for a couple more months. But the reason I came to that conclusion wasn't necessarily avoiding the negative. It was because I was filling my time with other stuff that was more of a priority, that I then couldn't afford to spend time being hungover and not feeling good, because it was then stopping me achieving all of the other things. Like, imagine if I turned up to the podcast and I'd been out on a bender on the weekend and I couldn't put my words together and all those things. Like I couldn't fit both those things in my life. And I feel like a lot of my friends now and people, and like yourself listening, when you get towards your like mid to late 20s, I feel like people start changing their priorities and what they value. And I've got a couple of mates that have gone fully sober now, and I'm so proud of them, because beforehand it was affecting their life in, say, multiple ways, and now they're like not totally new people, but they're more of themselves.
Absolutely.
I'm so proud of them for doing that. And for me, it's like, I'm going to continue not to have alcohol or, let's say, recreational drugs in my life, because it is stopping me doing those things.
So why do you drink anyway then? Why not just, why? Because this is the thing. It's something that I speak to a lot of people about, is that you've already said that you can see the benefits of not drinking. Like, for you, that's when you're most productive. Why do we need to drink in the first place?
It's a good question. And I do often ask that question to myself. And I feel like sometimes the answer is, every now and again, it's quite nice to escape. And I don't mean escape as in run away from bad things, but go to a completely different experience of life where you are drunk, carefree, you're meeting all these random people, and you're like, there's this elevated level of dopamine that you get from consuming alcohol and or recreational drugs, and it can be fun. Like, the elevated levels of energy with, you're sat around a table and you get to that fourth pint and everyone's like a little bit more carefree and they're laughing and things are funny that wouldn't usually be funny. Like, I can see that's enough of a draw for me that once every couple of months I will go out and sink 10 pints or whatever.
It's a good answer.
I feel like I'm selling it hard.
You are, yeah. But again, that's absolutely fine. I think the thing is with choosing to drink or not drink or take drugs is a personal journey at the end of the day. But I feel that the longer I go through the sobriety, the more I don't see the need to drink in any situation. The only time when I'd see an appeal to drink is if I was going to an event where I'd have to stay up past 10 o'clock because I'd have to stay up. Yeah. But then for me now, it's like, do I even want to stay up past 10 o'clock? Like, realistically, probably not.
In bed by 9, man.
Exactly. And again, I think the reason why a lot of people don't go alcohol-free or fail to go alcohol-free is because they're not setting any goals or any targets or anything to work towards or giving them any purpose or any reason to stay on. If you've got absolutely nothing planned at the weekend and no goals beyond your 9-to-5 job, obviously the Friday release, down the bar or Thursday or at the weekend is going to seem appealing because you've got nothing else really planned beyond that, if you see what I'm saying. I think that's a big thing to look at. If you feel that drugs and alcohol are not holding you back, but maybe they're not aligned with who you want to be, then make sure that you're setting yourself, a purpose, a reason to stay in on a Friday night and have that 2 hours of boredom and wake up in the morning on a Saturday feeling fresh with something to sink your teeth into.
And that's, I think, why I'd gone to this like semi-sober lifestyle now, and it was only because I'd replaced the priority or replaced something to fill that time. Yeah. It wasn't like I was like, I don't want to drink because I don't like the negative benefits. It's like I just can't do that and these other things.
Absolutely.
And right now I prioritize the podcast, the brand, seeing my friends, fitness and health. Like that gives me so much more joy now. But I can see how maybe in your early 20s, your priorities are more around socializing.
Absolutely.
And that's a big part of it. And maybe it's the classic thing, isn't it? You get to nearing 30 as I am and everyone's like, I can't handle the hangover anymore and those kind of things. So I think maybe as people's priorities start to shift, it becomes a lot easier to go, actually, I'm going to replace something else with this now.
Absolutely. I agree with that. But I've got a friend called Damien who I grew up with. I've known him for years. And he'd never drunk. Never in his life he had drunk. But he used to come out, when we were younger, he used to come out to the nights, to the clubs, to all the parties, stay up with all of us, just have as much fun. Because he'd never drunk before, he never sort of felt that he was missing out. And also he'd built all the skills like naturally within him. Like he was just a confident individual. He didn't need alcohol to speak to girls or party or have a laugh with a group of lads at the table, because that's just who he'd always been. I feel that once you start drinking, that you almost put that in place. Then it's like, well, I can't be confident. I can't sit around a group of, I can't sit around the pub of a group of lads without having a beer and having a laugh. And I think it's also quite sad that, if you think about it, is that, we sort of institutionalized into that to some degree, where from a young age we start drinking, we socialize with alcohol. Every single occasion, you think, whether it be a wedding or a funeral or a birthday or just a Friday night, everyone's drinking all the time with that. Once you cut that out, I'm not gonna lie, it's there's work to be done and it is quite scary, but I heavily took cocaine for 10 years in every single situation that it was. And there was a point of me when I first quit, then I thought, how am I ever going to be able to do even something like this, or how am I ever going to be able to go and see a friend ever again or have a conversation or go to a bar? But when you do the work that it takes to build that confidence with you as an individual, you realize that you don't need it in the first place. And it was actually the one thing that was holding me back from just living a life of happiness and being able to achieve much more than I ever thought was possible. I think this is another thing as well. A lot of people are scared of doing the work that it takes, to get to where they want to be. Like, would you, if I said, right, you take a pill now and you have all the confidence and fun that you have when you're drinking, but you never need to drink, would you take it?
Yeah.
Of course, everyone would, No one enjoys a hangover. I don't care who you are at the end of the day. There's a lot of DJs that glorify the sesh. I guarantee, and I know firsthand, that they all still suffer that come down like everyone else, and that's not fun. And it's for 2 or 3 hours of fun to have that 2 or 3 days of depression, anxiety, regret.
Yeah.
For what? At the end of the day, for what? And that's what I've loved about this journey for myself now is sort of rediscovering who I am, and also wishing that I'd done it when I was younger, because the podcast Trying to Adult, I feel what an exciting prospect for for a 22-year-old to just think, actually, just give up drink. I don't need it. By the time I get to my age, think of what would be possible, what they'd achieve with all that time gained back. I think for myself, how much time I actually wasted laying in bed, with a Domino's, just like heart palpitations, thinking, is this going to be it?
On the edge of a panic attack for 12 hours.
Like thinking, this is the end for me, how many days? And like last year was the first full year in my life from 30, I'm 37 now, I know I don't look it, thank you. From 36 to 37 was the first full year from since I was 15 years old that I'd never done any drugs or drunk, for the full first year. Thank you. And that was the first full year where I'd never got so much done. I'd never been so productive. But in not just work, in every other area of my life, relationships, family, self-development, health, like everything, travel, all these things that I didn't have the opportunity to do because I wasted so much time and money on going out at the weekend and then getting on it and then recovering. And I think this is what I'm always trying to push now, is like, don't think about going sober. I hate that word, sobriety. It sounds negative. Don't worry about giving up drink and drugs. Like, that's not the goal. For me, that's not the goal. The goal for me isn't to stay sober, but I know that if I want to achieve everything that I want to achieve right now in my life, the only way I'm going to be able to do that is if I stay away from drink and drugs, because that was the one thing that was holding me back. And I actually had a relapse. Again, I don't like that word, but August, not last year, the year before. And it ended up being the best thing that happened to me, because it was, before that, everything was going well. It was the only time where I had anxiety, where I wasted money, I made a fool of myself again, and I realised that's it, there's the sort of missing link for me, is just to stay away from that, because every time I did drink or do drugs, it would just pull me back, or something stupid would happen. And since then, it's been, life's been good.
I like how you framed that as, for some people, necessarily the goal isn't necessarily to be sober and quit drugs and alcohol. The goal is the new lifestyle that you want. The thing that's in the way and the barrier is the drugs and
absolutely, yeah. I feel, again, this is, I'm not saying this is for everyone at the end of the day. You have to make the decision for yourself. But if you are an individual who feels that when they wake up from a night out, they didn't have fun and it was a waste of time, then just give it a go. Just do 3 months, 6 months, 1 year without drugs and alcohol, and set some big goals for yourself in business, work, relationships, health, self-development. Set them goals for yourself. Leave drugs and alcohol behind and see what you achieve at the end of the day, and just make a note of how you're feeling on a weekly basis. And I guarantee that as time goes on, you might not want to go back to that, rather than just saying, because for me, what I did, I used to do this every weekend. I'm never going to drink again. And I used to go to Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous and therapy, and, for what as well? Just to almost go through the motion of it. I'm never going to do this again. And then a few days later, you recover, you forget about it, and you carry on and just repeat that cycle, because I didn't have any purpose. The only thing I was saying is that I want to give up. I'm an alcoholic, I want to give up. Whereas when I stopped doing that and focused on just changing my lifestyle completely and putting goals in place, then it almost become easy.
So that's almost step one of, if the person listening now is like, do you know what? Drinking drugs, it's not maybe super severe, but it does impact my life, and I would rather not use it or have a lot more control. It sounds like the starting point is to recognize that they are the barrier, not the goal that they need to be removed, and to then set a vision and a goal for the lifestyle that you do want.
Yeah.
So you're almost getting two birds with one stone. You're removing the negative of the drinks and drug, but you're also then working on all of these other things.
Absolutely.
It's not even just like a net increase. It's like removing the negative and adding a positive. Easier said than done.
Of course.
What's maybe the triggers, psychological triggers that people need to be aware of that will make it harder to remove it?
So for me, before I went through the process that I did now, I was always labeling myself as someone who has a drink problem, someone who has a drug problem, someone who's had a bad upbringing, you know, and that negative mindset was almost reinforcing the fact that I was going to drink again. You know, this is why, and again, I know it works for a lot of people, but Alcoholics Anonymous didn't work for me, because every week I was going in saying I am an alcoholic. Like, if that's what I'm telling myself every day, then what do I expect myself to be anything less? And I think that this is first of all is, I think a trigger is not talking about the negative. You know, not saying I need to get sober, I want to get sober, I've got a drug problem, I've got a drink problem. You know, eliminating that, stop talking about it.
And reframe that as I am working on this.
I want to, you know, I am a successful individual who's got these goals, who's working towards this, who wants to do this, who's making plans on the weekend and not just leaving it to chance. I think that's the you know, one of the first steps is like recognizing that alcohol, drugs are not serving you anymore, but leaving that then at the door. You know, that's it. You don't need to keep going on about it or every single, you know, day of the week and reminding yourself that drugs and alcohol are a problem. Leave that at the door. Start to focus on something else. Like, how do you want to look? How do you want to feel? You know, is there, you know, parts in your relationship you're not happy with yet? Are you happy with the job you're doing? Is there something that you've always wanted to give a go, you know, that you've never been able to because the only time you have is Saturday and Sunday, and you're waking up on a Saturday and Sunday hungover all the time, you know?
So that's almost identifying if the drinks and drugs have been a coping mechanism for something that's negative in your life, i.e. you hate your job or you're not in a healthy relationship, and that was become your escape. So I suppose to be able to remove the coping mechanism bit, actually focus on the thing that was causing you to do some of those things as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I think for me, I always find that fitness is a great place to start at the end of the day. You know, if you're not happy with the way you look, the way you feel, then that's where to start. You know, fitness is the place to start. For me, it was a huge shift for me, because I was always focusing on my past or labeling my, you know, I had a bad upbringing, so that's the reason why I drink. I've been to Afghanistan, so I've probably got PTSD. I've got ADHD, so that's the reason why. Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm an alcoholic, so I'm never going to be able to not be an alcoholic. You know, these were labels. When I started taking up fitness, especially running, it gave me purpose. It gave me feeling again. You know, it helped me build discipline, because this is another thing. Let's face it, for a lot of people, unless you're a functioning addict, like a functioning heroin addict, where you have some physical dependency on that drug, for a lot of people, I don't know the actual statistics of it, but for a lot of people, including myself, it was more of a discipline thing as well. I was the one making the choice. Like, the dealer wasn't ringing me up and saying, "Oh, I'm just outside your house now." Yeah. You know, especially if you're someone like me, where I would only use cocaine after drinking, but then I'd always have 2 drinks. And I knew that if I have 2 drinks, that's exactly what was going to happen. But still, I consciously made that decision. So I think firstly is recognizing it, but removing the negative and focusing on goals that you want. If you're not happy with the way you look, then the first goal, fitness-based, especially body transformation, getting in great shape, takes discipline, it takes commitment, it takes hard work, but it's also extremely rewarding. And I think that's a really good place to start.
You also can't achieve those things when you're going out on a bender on the weekend. Like, again, replace the need for going out and doing all of these things with the new purpose.
Absolutely, yeah, exactly that. You know, if you're waking up on a Saturday fresh and you know you've got, you know, some great food to eat, you know, you've got maybe a nice long walk, maybe a gym workout or a run on the Sunday as well planned, you know, and you've got plenty of time to prepare everything for the week ahead, and maybe a little side hustle that you've got going on, or, you know, like for me, learning a language was a big one. Like that's exciting. Yeah. Whereas if you just, what have I got on this weekend? Nothing. You know, going into the weekend with nothing planned, no goals. Like you're probably going to drink. And also, just want to say, the goal. Remember, isn't to not ever drink again, because a lot of people have a relapse. I had loads of relapses, but the good thing is with fitness is that you build structure, you build routine. So rather the next day, maybe not the next day, the hangover was a complete write-off, but the day after that, rather than just being like, fuck, I've done it again, it's like, forget it. Back on the routine, back on the structure, back on the purpose, on the goals again. And that made it much easier to not have them 3 or 4 days of just recovery and depression. It was like I almost had something to get back on board with. And a couple of days of working out and eating well and like intermittent fasting, another one was a huge one for me. I started to feel great again. I forgot about that and I focused on my purpose again. Whereas the reverse end of that was, you know, you say you don't want to drink, go out, get on it the weekend, 2 or 3 days recovering, you've got nothing to focus on, you know, you're depressed. Thursday comes around, you've forgotten about it, and then you're back on it again.
Yeah, but like in the vicious
cycle. Yeah,
comes around.
You know, it's key to break that cycle as well.
We've covered a lot. Yeah.
Sorry, I've gone off on a complete.
No. This is. I think for the person listening, it's probably going to resonate with their lives and maybe experiences that they've had. If they've gone, do you know what? I want to have a bit more control over this. Like, you know, if you've talked some sense here, what's maybe the one key message that you want them to know, whether they're at the start of the journey, they're midway through it, they're curious about the journey? What's the kind of key takeaway that you want them to have?
It's honestly worth it. Like if you've never done a long period without drugs and alcohol, then you know, what have you got to lose? At the end of the day, it's I think that if you're just starting a journey, you've got to be patient for sure. But I've never met anyone who's sober who's like, oh, I just wish I was drinking and taking drugs, who also has purpose and goals and focus. If you're just going to, you know, therapy and just talking about all the past all the time and bringing it up, then fair enough, maybe you do want to drink. But if you're going through a period of sobriety and you've got big ambitions and big dreams and big goals, then I've never met anyone who regrets it. And if you're just starting out, that's what you need to keep focusing on at the end of the day, and it really is worth it. And
as well, like, I love this idea of the cinema, or the rocking chair cinema theory, which is when you're old and grey or bald like me already, you're at one point going to be sat in a rocking chair with nothing but your memories of your life. And the idea behind that is, how do you start to foresee some of the things that you're doing now that your future self will regret? And I think for a lot of people, they may regret the constant weekends and the vicious cycle and the trappings of that and the rippling negative effects and impacts that it has on their life. And I think if people can look back and go, I'm so glad that I listened to that podcast, come across your Instagram page or whatever, and gone, do you know what? I made that change, and that was the best change that I'd made in my life. Because again, you're not going to regret doing something that's a total positive in your life. Well, this is the thing, when you're 80 years old, if the only thing that you've got as memories is going out and getting on it, like, that is a fucking sad existence. Yeah, so you don't really remember that. Of course anyway, you don't. So. Oh, what? Remember when I was, 29, I was sat in that kitchen for 2 days chatting absolute waffle about all this stuff that I was going to do, but I didn't because I was hungover for 3 days and then repeated that cycle. Not at all, you're never going to do that. I think the opportunity that you have from leaving drugs and alcohol behind presents so much more time where you can literally try anything at the end of the day. And if it doesn't work out, you can try something new. And this is another thing. If you put everything into going sober and you leave that behind because you feel it's not serving you, you do 3 months, 6 months. If you don't like it, you just go back and start doing it again, But I think that people just get scared of that. But then that's a great point to look back. If you carry on in this trajectory now as a young adult,
where are you going to be in 80 years of time? You know, when you're 80, probably 180 by the time they're 80.
And to your point as well, how do you know it's not for you? Like, I use this really rubbish analogy, but like, how do you know you don't want to live in Spain if you've never lived in Spain?
Happiness. You know, that's for me, this has been the biggest, the best thing about sobriety is happiness. Is if you're not happy doing anything, why do it at the end of the day? And if you're not happy drinking, then why do it? If you're not happy being sober, I mean, I'd love to know anyone that isn't happy being sober, for sure, especially when they're deeper into it, then don't do it. But I think that how you'll know it's for you or not is if you're happy at the end of the day, if you're happy.
Tell me more about your coaching or programs. Who are they for and how do you help them?
Yeah, fantastic. So I own a coaching business called Willer's Fitness. We work with individuals usually who have some success in their life elsewhere. So, you know, maybe quite a good job, quite a good business, quite creative, but feel that the one thing that's holding them back at the moment is that cycle that they're still stuck in, you know, especially a lot of guys in the city who have got good jobs in bank but going out on a Thursday night after work and then they're just playing catch up for the next 4 days. What we do is help them break that cycle, and we do that by 3 phases: coming in and building a foundation, so making sure that they've got habits, discipline, structure, routine outside of their work commitments, especially that morning and evening routine. Then we go through some transformation, usually body transformation first, but it can be performance based as well. After that, then we sort of expand on it. So we've got a solid foundation. They're in control. The program's called Take Back Control. They're looking great. They're feeling great. Now we want to aspire to do more with that. So then we really focus on excelling in the performance range. For a lot of guys, it's looking at stuff like, you know, running a marathon or Tough Mudder or something like that. But at the same time, not just focusing on the fitness element, looking at other areas of the life where they might be, you know, missing a void, you know, and needing to fill that time that they've had through drink and drugs for so many years. That's the core business. We're now taking it over to India. So one of my clients, Ved, he was India's fittest man for 2 times CrossFit athlete, come off. Once he sort of lost his purpose, come on board with us, now a good friend, and we're setting up the same model to work with the India market. And then now we're setting up a new one as well called Resynced, where it goes back to my core, which was music industry, because when we first started, that's what it was based around, was music industry. So now we're just in the process of finishing that up, where anyone who works in the creative space will come onto this program. It's a big part on habits, accountability, and community as well. So if any of this resonates with you, check it out. Yeah, and they can find you where? Instagram is where we push the most. So at Willer's Fitness, you'll find us there. Cool, fantastic. Really appreciate you coming. Brilliant. Thanks, Adam. Cheers. Nice.